guys can also go on this side because it might get a bit difficult to see from here. There's lots of space over there. Good evening and welcome to the Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist. I'm Ulrike McGregor and I'm delighted to see all of you here tonight in person, and we also welcome everyone on the live stream joining us for our first session of our reflections on Lent and Easter through art. Just as a reminder, this reflection and previous reflections remain available on the YouTube and Facebook pages linked to this Co-Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist under the heading Videos. This is a good opportunity if you're unable to attend in person or can't watch the videos live. I would like once again thank Father Mann for the wonderful opportunity and everyone here at St. John, all the staff, to give us the opportunity in this endeavor to use beauty and art to further explore and expand our faith. And thank you, Brian, for your fantastic job with the live streaming of this lecture. In our reflection series over the next 6 weeks, we will focus on works of art from the 14th to the 20th centuries. Each lecture is independent of the next. All works of art which I have chosen for this Lenten series are different from previous reflections. However, we will meet a few of our old artist friends again. On this slide, you can see the timeline of the different eras, periods, and movements in the European art, and where the works we will discuss tonight fall. Our first work of art is a lithograph entitled Moses and the Burning Bush. It was painted in 1966 by the Russian-born French artist Marc Chagall, a key figure in European modernism. We will then turn to the Renaissance, exploring the painting Temptations of Christ by the Florentine artist Sandro Botticelli. This fresco is a part of a series of frescoes depicting the life of Moses and the life of Christ, which are completed by a team of Renaissance artists in 1482 in the Sistine Chapel in Rome. And I believe, Father Mann, you and a couple of people will go to Rome, and so don't just look at the ceiling, also look at the paintings on the side. They're beautiful as well, and you might then find this one. And our last work of art of this evening is the famous wood block print Under the Wave of Kanagawa, and it's better known as the Great Wave, created circa 1829 to 1832 by the Japanese painter and printmaker Katsushika Hokusai. And some of you may know already and some don't. So at the time when I introduce these works of art, I will invite the audience to ask questions, to comment, and to reflect on these 3 works of art. Please use the microphone that's available to ensure that everyone in the chapel, but also everyone on the live stream, is able to hear your comments and questions. And Amelia will help with the microphone. So if you just wait a second so she can catch up and turn over the microphone to you. With the celebration of Ash Wednesday, just yesterday, we have begun our Lenten journey. During this time, we prepare our hearts and our minds alongside Jesus for his passion, death, and resurrection as Easter, the key moment in human history, through daily prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Lent is observed for 40 days, excluding Sundays, and it concludes with the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday. The period of 40 days refers to the number of days and nights Jesus spent in the wilderness without food and drink whilst being tempted by Satan. As many of you probably know, the number 40 has marked many other important events in the Bible. And I just wanted to show us a few of them. And because the number 40 symbolizes in the Bible periods of testing, trial, or probation. And so one example is rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights onto earth while Noah was on his ark. Jonah was sent to Nineveh in the tummy of the great whale, as we have seen last year, to tell the people they have to repent. They had 40 days to repent before God would destroy their city. As we know, Jesus spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness. It was 40 days between the resurrection of Jesus and his ascension into heaven. And not to forget, Moses spent 40 years in the desert before God spoke to him through the burning bush, which is the backdrop of our first painting. The first painting is entitled Moses and the Burning Bush, created by Marc Chagall in 1966. And it is one of 24 original color lithographs published in the book The Story of the Exodus by Leon Amiel. And now I will give a brief introduction into the life and the accomplishments of Chagall, and you can follow on the handouts if that's helpful. Chagall was born in Würzburg, today part of Belarus, on July 6, 1887. He was born into a Jewish family and was the oldest of 9 children. Before World War I, he traveled between St. Petersburg, Paris, and Berlin. During that period, he created his own mixture and style of modern art, based on his ideas of Eastern European and Jewish folklore. He spent the wartime years in his native Belarus, becoming one of the country's most distinguished artists and a member of the modernism avant-garde. He later worked in Moscow for a few years in difficult conditions before moving back to Paris. During World War II, he escaped from occupied France to the United States, where he lived in New York City for 7 years before he finally returned to France in 1948. Marc Chagall was an early modernist who was associated with the major artistic styles of Cubism, Symbolism, Fauvism, and Surrealism. During the 1960s, he traveled extensively, receiving commissions from all over the world. The last 30 years of Chagall's life were very prolific. He created works in a wide range of artistic formats, including paintings, drawings, book illustrations, stage sets, ceramics, tapestries, and stained glass. Having mastered the medium of stained glass, he worked on many large-scale installations, such as the windows of the Cathedral of Metz in France, the United Nations building in New York, the America windows for the Art Institute of Chicago, and many more. And some of you might have been able to see the Marc Chagall windows in the Art Institute in Chicago. They're absolutely brilliant. The blue is just absolutely stunning. Chagall died in 1985 at the age of 97 in Saint-Paul-de-Vence, close to the Côte d'Azur. He left behind a legacy of being a true master of color and an early adopter of surrealism and modernism. And as you consider our first painting of tonight, I would like to quote from Exodus chapter 3, verse 2. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. And now I invite you to share your comments, reflections, questions with us, with me, and I will also walk you through and give some hints and tips and background information. So any ideas or suggestions right off the mark?
I have a question. I can't remember what Fauvism is.
Fauvism was it's kind of an abstract and kind of blotchy colors. And if you help me out, the most famous of Fauvism artist, he did the snake. Chris is going to look it up. But it's not, so it's more abstract and big colors.
Another question.
Yes.
Can you speak more about the lithograph medium?
Yeah, I don't want to go into it too much. It's a type of print. So you have etching. That's a type of print. So Chagall created this lithograph in 1966, and as I say, it belongs actually to a whole series of 24 telling the story of the Exodus of the Israelites leaving Egypt. But in 1954, he was certainly thinking about those lines producing something, and he made that as an etching. So in etching, you have a copper plate, you have a very fine point instrument, and you scratch into the surface. Lithograph is a little bit different. It uses kind of almost like a stone, but it is a print technique. I could do that sometimes I do introductions and choose different topics, so we could maybe do print.
So if you go back to the photo or the lithograph, I feel distracted. It looks like he has bunny ears.
Yes. Any thoughts why Marc Chagall would have chosen to represent?
I have this devotional that I read, and 2 days ago this came up on there saying that I think some of the statues of Moses looks like he has horns, and that it came from a misinterpretation of beams of light, that somehow it got literally translated into horns. I don't know if that's accurate or
Right.
not,
And exactly, kind of going along. So the word of God hits Moses, and he really internalizes it. And Marc Chagall chose, and it looks like horns. He could have done this maybe a little bit more subtle. Yes, but it is the word of God. Because Moses is kneeling in front of the burning bush, and he hears the voice of God. And Marc Chagall, also with these white rays coming down, he wanted to make the word visible. Amelia?
In the middle of the sun there, what are those letters or numbers? What does that say?
Yeah, it's a there are words or signage. I mean, he hasn't really translated it, but also again to represent the word of God.
You know, as we recall, Moses was very resistant to receive the call from God because he was like having a stutter or not so able to speak. So he's saying to God, you know, I can't do it. And then you think that there is this kind of revelation where he humbly comes, acknowledging a presence, and then so able to speak, so able to reveal and to lead. So I just contrast, you know, his initial, I can't do it, and then all of what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think maybe to pull on this a little bit, the burning bush, because we would wonder, I mean, now we have fireplaces and the wood doesn't burn, but that's new technology, right? I don't think we had that 3,000 years ago. So it's the idea that God calls us close and we can come to him. And he helps us, right? If we have a problem, if we have a stutter, or we might think we don't have the right words to say, God will provide that. He gives us the fire in our hearts that helps us to overcome these problems. But it doesn't burn us up. So he doesn't consume us. We're not done when we interact with God. We are actually a better version of ourselves if we allow ourselves to come closer to the fire.
How about is that an angel above?
Yes.
Is that a specific angel or just an angel?
It's an angel, yeah, because the opening, the Bible verse starts, the angel comes out of the flames. Yeah. I find this, and also in the Bible verse, so Moses comes closer to the burning bush because God calls him, he calls Moses, Moses, and then he comes closer, but then God says, take off your shoes because you're on holy ground. And so Marc Chagall, I think, made a point out of that. He very specifically depicted Moses' feet bare, without shoes. And I thought that's a very important detail, because it's actually, yes, we are on holy ground, so we take that very seriously, and it changes our mindset. I think he comes with greater reference, or we approach something with greater reference. But it also makes us vulnerable, isn't it? If you think, if I with my boots, and some people might know me, I was famous, and people could hear me walk through the hallway. They would say, oh, Ulrike is coming, because I have a really hard walk. But if I would do that with bare feet, I couldn't do that. So I would be much more careful. And so one is vulnerable and probably as open and not as self-confident. Coming with it's kind of, we're not coming with our idea. We are supposed to listen to the ideas and being sent out and do the mission.
I'm struggling a little bit with the expression on Moses' face, if it's a combination of awe and being dumbfounded, or just kind of a look. Yeah, and maybe if I was looking at a burning bush that wouldn't be consumed, I'd have the same look on my face. Yeah,
I agree. It's probably a mixed, awe, but also astonishment, and kind of this, really me, right? Grasping the responsibility that has been given to him. Yeah.
The redness is on the left side of his face. You would think it would be on the side where the bush is burning, but the bush is not really radiating out. The lines that you pointed out earlier are coming from far up in the right corner, and I assume that's the sun that he might be, and even the sun is not producing these radiating lights as much as I assume God is at the end of of that. And the little animals remind me of the cave paintings. You know, I think that was in France, right? The cave
Yes.
paintings.
Yeah, I agree with Gabe. I mean, it's interesting that the shadow side seems to be the side, even on his clothing, versus the light side is opposite of the sun and the burning bush. It's like all reversed.
Uh-huh.
I know it's time to move on. Could you make a comment? When I've seen the burning bush by other artists, right? So a modernist kind of view of this, the distinction between something more practical, if you will, and now the modernist comes with this particular kind of image. Do I make sense?
Yeah, and I hear that. Yes, it's probably if some of you might remember, we have seen a painting by Chagall, or you might all be familiar with the works by Chagall. He doesn't necessarily strive to present something in a realistic way. For him, I think it was, I mean, obviously he chose the red as a color of flames, but maybe not necessarily that he was thinking, oh, I need to bring the flames closer to Moses. He was probably more concerned about color contrast, where it would make the greatest impact. So that would be my justification. In the works of Chagall, he was very concerned about color effects, color contrast, rather than necessarily, it's like, oh, I need to bring the red here because that would reflect the heat or the radiance or the Word of God. Maybe let's see. So this was the etching he did. At the same time, he also produced a large-scale painting of the same work or the same idea. And here, just a kind of the color contrast. I think it's, since we were talking about colors, Chagall used a lot of colors, but in my mind, it's always the Prussian blue that is very much associated with Chagall. He loved the blue, and I think he couldn't resist to kind of go back to the blue. And I think he really more interested in the ideas. I think the hand to demonstrate the devotion of Moses and the bare feet. Maybe if he, and here, so the bush is maybe a little, that the fire is more even. But I think he's not so much concerned of realistic depiction of the event, more the ideas.
It is, I think, worth remembering that, Moses was 80 years old when this event occurred. But to get back to the fauvism thing, so fauve is the French word for a wild beast, and the reason that it was attributed to this art movement in France in 1905 to 1910 was that it was about color rather than image, and this contrast of oranges and greens and purples, and it didn't last very long, and the major criticism of it was, that it was all about the color rather than the image. And I think that's what you've just described there with Chagall. With Chagall, when you see his pictures, it's all about color rather than an exact image.
Yeah.
And so this kind of work, as I said, the period was short.
Can you use the microphone?
Yeah,
properly?
the period was short, but it led on to abstract expressionism and cubism, and it's all about the blues. And Matisse was the most famous fauvist.
Oh, that's, yeah.
Yeah. So it's all about the blues.
Yeah, and we're coming back to that in the last painting. The lady.
hit by his feet, his gown, is that the earth? Is that, it looks like the earth, like water, and does,
Oh, kind of a puddle of water, you think?
yeah, his gown, his, is that what is
Yeah,
going on there?
I think he was just playing. You mean the blue in his gown? I think Chagall was playing with colors a little bit here, rather than realistic depiction. Yeah. So I think we want to move on to the next, and I always leave you with a question that kind of comes to my mind while I'm working on these works of art. And my question is, through the burning bush, God gave the direction to Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. What direction is God giving each of us? Our second work of art is the fresco Temptations of Christ by the Italian Renaissance painter Sandro Botticelli, created in 1480 to 1482. It is located on the north wall of the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican City in Rome. Alessandro di Mariano Filippi, better known as Sandro Botticelli, was one of the greatest painters of the Florentine Renaissance. Botticelli was born in 1445 in Florence, Italy. His artistic name translates to Little Barrel, which derived from the nickname of Sandro Botticelli's brother Giovanni, who was called Botticello, apparently because of his rotund figure. Throughout Botticelli's career, members of the influential Medici family were his principal patrons. Botticelli received many high-profile commissions, some of which are considered amongst the greatest achievements of the Renaissance. Botticelli initially trained as a goldsmith. However, he later entered the studio of the famed artist Fra Filippo Lippi. He also worked with other leading Renaissance painters like Antonio Pogliuolo and Andrea del Riccio. In 1470, Botticelli established his own workshop, and by 1480, he had reached the pinnacle of his career. He produced secular portraits of Florentine elite, as well as religious and mythological scenes that defined a new era of artistic achievement. In 1481, alongside artists of Ghirlandaio, Rosselli, Perugino, and others, Botticelli was among the several Italian painters hired to decorate the Sistine Chapel, as commissioned by Pope Sixtus IV. During the 1480s and the 1490s, Botticelli produced two of his most famous works: La Primavera, circa 1480, and The Birth of Venus, circa 1485. Though his mythologically inspired works are among the best known of his oeuvre, Botticelli completed a number of single-figure portraits in this genre because it was established in North Europe. Only 8 of these single-figure portraits by Botticelli are known to still exist, with most of them held in international museums. The largest part of Botticelli's oeuvre consists of devotional works. Botticelli died in 1510 in Florence. Initially, his work went relatively unnoticed until renewed interest arose in the 19th century. And now I would like to quote from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, was led by the Spirit into the desert for 40 days, to be tempted by the devil. He ate nothing at all during those days. So this is the painting. It's quite a busy work, so I will help you to work through this. And the way we will look at it, it's like reading a book. So quite often, if you look at the painting and it's very busy and it's overwhelming, it quite helps to read it from left to right and often kind of from the top to the bottom. And that's what we're going to do. And I'm going to show the individual, but it's the individual images. So we're going to see Jesus actually 4 times. Once over here in the middle, and then over here, and then again, and then we're going to focus on the central painting, the central image of the painting. So this is the image on the upper left-hand corner. And so remember, we are now, Jesus was led into this desert, and at the end, the devil tempted him 3 times. What do we see here? Any So, who's this fella? Yeah. So it's Satan or the devil. Is there actually one way or another as he would be described? Is it the devil or Satan, or is it interchangeable actually? Okay. But he actually has this, or tried to disguise himself. So he looks more like a hermit, with kind of the beard and the cap, but he still gives himself away a little bit. So he has the wings, and also, and it might be hard to see, but if you look at his feet, they're kind of like claws or talons. And exactly, so he's pointing at the rocks. So he's asking Jesus to do what? Turn it into bread. So yeah, so this was the first temptation. So that was on the upper left. So we see the first temptation where Satan asked Jesus to turn the stones into bread. And Jesus replies, "We do not live of bread alone." So then we move over to kind of the center of the painting. And here again, so which temptation and what do we see here? So it's on top of a church, i.e. temple. We obviously kind of, because the painting was done during the Renaissance, and quite often, even if an Italian painter or a painter at the time would depict a biblical story, they would set it into a contemporary setting. So even it depicts a story that happened 1,500 years before this was painted, the artist would choose to put it into a contemporary setting and also in a local setting. So this is actually the facade of a church in Rome that Pope Sixtus IV was building at the time. So, but it is meant to be the temple. And Satan, the devil, takes Jesus on top of the temple and asked him to throw himself down and to test, because in the Bible it says God would send his angels so Jesus, the Christ, would not hit his feet. So that's the second temptation. And then this one, and I cut it off maybe a little bit too early, I should have left it. So what's happening here?
the devil is offering Jesus all of creation, saying, bow down and worship me, and it's all yours. Looks
Right.
like he's given up on the cape on this one, though.
So obviously Jesus denies and does not bow to Satan, and actually it looks like throws him off the cliff, and actually that then finally reveals his true nature. His cloak flies off, and we see kind of the tail, kind of as we have the image of Satan. So obviously, kind of a pictorial device to depict Satan or the devil like this. And as we know, temptations come in any shape or form. They're not necessarily like this. They're not obvious. So I think that's also the takeaway message from this. So we did the top of the painting. So we have the temptations of Jesus Christ. And then, so what one would ask, if you look at the image, what does that have to do with the main scene? Again, we're going to move over a little bit more, but we have beautifully dressed people. We have a fire going, and the main two characters here. And I was just kind of backing up maybe. We would think it's hard to read this. I mean, so you really would have to. So when you go to Sistine Chapel, you're not going to have time, because we were just there a couple of years ago. You have like 5 minutes, and you look at the ceiling, and then you're being ushered out the ceiling. So you never really have time to look at this. And now we, in the modern era, actually are allowed to go into the Sistine Chapel. When the Sistine Chapel was built and decorated, the general population didn't have access to it. It was reserved for the popes and the bishops and for prestigious guests. So you would think, why did they spend all the effort on doing this? And why would someone want to be part of it? And a little bit, the reason, the thing I thought of as an explanation is, first of all, it's a storytelling. Obviously, the priests and the bishops and the Pope knows all the stories, but it's just trying to give them a vocabulary, and also they would then go into their own churches and then would hire artists and say, oh, I have seen this. And I compare this in my mind with Paris fashion show, right? I mean, if you go to a fashion show, first of all, who's going there? There's a handful of people ever going to see them. And second of all, the fashion that is being shown, no one would want to wear that. But it does kind of give the trend of the newest colors, of the new cuts, and the newest techniques. And I think that's how to understand this. Why would the Pope and the bishops, why would they have these wonderful churches with all this decoration? It is because they would invite bishops from other areas, and they would see that, and they would go out and because remember, many of the works at that point were commissioned. So it wasn't an artist saying, oh, I'm going to paint this and then see if I can sell it. That was not the model. It was the church mostly at that point would approach an artist and ask them to paint something, and they would be very specific. They would say, oh, I would like a Jesus figure here and want to depict a story. So I think that's maybe you were wondering why something like this is in Sistine Chapel, and no one really has time to look at it at all, really. But I think that's the background story. It's kind of like the fashion show. I think it's might be a good comparison. But sorry, just to come back here. Botticelli put Jesus here into the story again with 3 angels, and he's telling them, making the connection with his temptations and then with this main scene. And what do you think? I mean, we have a fire there. It's the temple is supposed to be kind of a church in the back. So what kind of a rite is this?
Looks like a wedding, to me anyway.
Excuse me?
Like a wedding?
Could be a wedding, yeah.
So I know Pope Sixtus IV commissioned it. Is that the Pope in the picture? In the foreground?
I don't think he didn't have himself placed into the. You could have thought sometimes they like to do that, but he didn't. So we have a fire. So a wedding, I can see why you were kind of thinking the white, but it's actually the rite of a Jewish sacrifice. So it would be a sacrifice that would happen on a daily basis. So as we have the fire here, and then over here a woman is bringing some birds or some hens that kind of would be the sacrifice. The lady over here brings some wood, and in between, so there's kind of two interpretations a little bit. So it could be either that there's the story of the leopard. Jesus heals the leopard, and he comes back to present himself to the priests to show that he was cleansed, and he brings a sacrifice as well. The other interpretation is that it's this coming together of Moses and Jesus, and that it's not Jesus himself, but someone who presents himself as the future sacrifice. And that's kind of pulling the Old Testament and the New Testament together. And the temptations of Christ were at the beginning of his ministry and kind of the transition from the Old into the New Testament.
And so are you saying that the center of this picture is really about the foretelling of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I know this was a bit of a handful, but it's again, just thinking of you guys going to Rome, and it's an unusual painting in the sense, because if you would Google the temptations of Christ, you see one of them, or maybe two, because they kind of can combine them. But I think this painting is particularly interesting because it depicts all the three temptations in one painting, and then kind of pulls it together to move it forward to Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection.
For the contemporaries of the time, if it was the priests or the Pope and cardinals, whomever, would they walk in here and look at and automatically get it? Or was somebody else helping them as well?
Yeah, good question. Father Martin,
I know you weren't there.
Father Martin, did you get this right away? So no, I think yes. I think that's why I like to use the word reading. So quite often, even with Marc Chagall, it's you have to spend time with many paintings. You have to kind of orientate yourself. You have to know how to read a painting, and coming up to the next painting. So as I said, we read this as we are in the Western world. We read from the left to the right, and that's how you often read a painting. It kind of helps you, and in the past, not so much recently, but I like to draw lines again, to kind of help you to. There's a certain line that helps you to decipher paintings. But with this, I'm sure, either someone would have to stand in front of it, or someone, I'm sure, walk them through the painting as well. Yeah. So, and I will leave you with my question. As Jesus was tested in the desert, how do we respond to the challenges in our own lives? And are we guided by Scripture as Jesus was in the desert? The third and last work of art of this evening is entitled Under the Wave of Kanagawa, better known as the Great Wave. It is the most famous of a series of 36 woodblock prints created between 1829 and 1832 by the Japanese artist Hokusai. And I will briefly introduce him and his accomplishments. Hokusai was born in 1760 in Edo, now known as Tokyo. Hokusai is widely recognized as one of Japan's greatest artists, having modernized traditional print styles through his innovations in subjects and composition. Hokusai's childhood was spent in an artisan's community of wooden houses and narrow streets in Edo. He began painting at the age of 6 and also learned woodblock carving from a young age. Throughout his life, Hokusai changed his name around 30 times, a common practice for Japanese artists at the time. And not because they thought that the work was bad that they did before and they wanted to move on. It was actually quite often when they believed that they had reached the height of that particular area that they were working in, that they then should move on and take on a new name and then kind of start again and then work themselves up. Hokusai is best known as author of the woodblock prints series, 36 Views of Mount Fuji, which includes the iconic and internationally recognized print, The Great Wave. The prints by Hokusai were embraced by European artists who borrowed his decorative motifs, his practice in working in series, and his vision of contemporary society. Hokusai died in his 90th year in 1849, having created around 30,000 print designs across his lifetime. So not individual prints, because each design we'll see, creates many hundreds and thousands of prints, but individual print designs. From the 1870s onwards, Japanism became a prominent artistic trend in Europe. Many of Hokusai's prints in general, but the Great Wave specifically, had a strong influence on early French Impressionists, such as Edgar Degas, Edouard Manet, and Claude Monet. He also influenced post-impressionists, such as Vincent van Gogh. It's believed that Starry Night, the painting with the blue and the swirls, that really much was inspired by this work. And Art Nouveau artists such Henri de Lautrec. So about 8,000 copies of The Great Wave were initially printed. Several museums throughout the world hold copies of The Great Wave, many of which came from 19th century private collections of Japanese prints. However, today only 100 prints in varying conditions are thought to have survived into the 21st century. The Great Wave has been described as, I quote, possibly the most reproduced image in the history of all art, as well as being a contender for the, as quote, most famous artwork in Japanese history. And with this, for this artwork, I would like to quote from the gospel reading we just heard today. It's Luke chapter 9, verses 23 and 24. Jesus said, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." And now I'm curious how you make the connection between this gospel reading and this painting.
I like how the artist made the waves look extra fierce with like the claw-like extensions from the waves. It looks like they want to devour the men in the boats.
Yes.
They're just like claws.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, it looks like the first boat, the one in the front, is the leader, and the other one's following him. But they're both in pretty bad trouble, it looks like.
That's right. Yes. And just since I spent time on reading the painting, so since this is Japanese, and the Japanese read from the right to the left, so we actually should think about this painting also more looking from the right to the left. So as you said, so the boats are actually, so there are 3 boats. There's one already over here, and then one here and one over here. And so they are going straight into the waves. And how do you, I mean, first of all, how many of you are familiar with the painting? Or with the print? Just yeah. Yeah. And what is your impression on it? How do you feel it? Is it terrifying? Oh.
Yeah. The passengers, or occupants of the boats, they just look so small in comparison to the wave.
Yes.
It's terrifying.
It is, yes. And just so I mentioned in the preamble, so this is one of 36 prints. Sorry. So I just chose a couple of other ones, and it's 36 prints of the views of Mount Fuji. And so for Hakusai, Mount Fuji is always in the print, in the work. So sometimes it's bigger and sometimes it's really small. But that was his guiding element throughout all the 36 works. And here also, first of all, the waves are gigantic, they're huge. And then we see Mount Fuji is just there in the back. So why would I've chosen this? I try to kind of pull out a little bit, what is the challenge for us if we the painting in our lives, thinking of Lent and what lies before us?
Well, if you read from right to left, and you just think, I kind of think of the wave as being what Lent is all about and what we're pursuing, and maybe even John the Baptist, or not John the Baptist, but when he walked on water, and just the challenges that we all have during Lent. And it seems like they went and they even saw that there was more challenge, but they continued to follow the light or to follow the wave and go into it. So maybe we have to continue to do that too, hopefully.
Exactly, yes, yes. The lady behind.
Being consumed by, just basically being consumed by the wave.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And kind of they are a little bit stuck there. You're on the boat, you're on the water, the wave comes up, and I think it's this, you're concerned, but you have to kind of go through. And then believe that Jesus Christ will help us, and kind of help us getting through it.
I see it as trusting that God will be there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that they would make it without Jesus. So I think they know that already, that they're, heading towards something that's going to devour them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can one assume that the magnitude of the wave was unexpected? Was this a storm that blew up when fishermen were just going out to do their fishing? Was this, just some unexpected catastrophe like life sometimes?
Yes, it could be. And to reflect that back onto our lives, that's, you probably walk down the street and suddenly something happens. It's kind of this unexpected moment, yes?
I guess in your life, when the waves get that big, you trust even more.
Yes.
Trust in God.
Yeah.
I was struck by what you said about the other prints, and that Mount Fuji is always maybe the anchor.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we're facing these waves that are all in front of us, there's an anchor of Jesus, and God doesn't move, doesn't change. We're all worried about the here and now versus the part of it that's eternal.
Yes, I like that too. It's so steadfast, isn't it? It's yeah, as I say, it's an anchor. It just sits there. It doesn't move. It's not impacted on these waves. Absolutely, yes. And just to come a little bit of technical, so circling back to Marc Chagall and his colors. So in the lithograph was a lot of yellows and kind of reds, and his painting he used his classic blue, and it's called Prussian blue. Prussian blue was discovered by accident, as many scientific discoveries are happening, as we know. It was by accident discovered by a German alchemist, and it was the first synthetic pigment that was created, and that was in 1706. And it kind of stayed around Europe. We have talked about blues in the past. Blue is usually the color that's used for the mantle of the Virgin Mary or of Jesus. We saw that in the painting before, because it was very, very expensive to make. It was lapis lazuli, which is a precious stone that it's just available in a very small region, I think just around Iran, that needs to be grinded down and washed, and so it's very, very expensive, so it was only be able to be used in small amounts. The discovery of Prussian blue was a big step forward, and it also, besides ultramarine, a couple of other blues were used, but they're either oxidized, so they over time turn greenish. So sometimes when you go to a museum and you see Mary rather with a kind of a greenish cloak, it wasn't a mistake by the artist. It was just something that happened over the 200, 300, 400 years that the pigment oxidized. Or particular colors, they would actually fade. So indigo blue, it just would fade out. But Prussian blue wasn't. It was very stable. And it also allowed the artist to have different shades of blue. So Japan closed itself up for 200 years. So from the mid of the 17th century until the mid of the 19th century, Japan was closed up. And just around that time when they opened up, through China, they became access to, just in 1829, they became access that they could get their hands on Prussian blue. So Hokusai used that right away in all his prints. And that also made it so famous because it was the wow effect. when he was able to use that for the first time right there and then. So yeah, I agree. I think everyone kind of got that feeling. It's the uncertainty. But we have to keep going. Just keep plowing on, even if you think you can do it. And I like what Chris said. Mount Fuji, God is right next to us, and He helps us through. I know we are over time. I just wanted to show you this, and the reason I used this painting, which is a little bit, it's not what I've used so much. I mean, usually I tend to use more devotional works of art. This is a book by Sister Wendy Beckett. She was a nun in Great Britain, and she is quite famous. She did a BBC series on art. She was an art historian. And she died a couple of years ago, but she has this little book, The Art of Lent, and it has one image for each day throughout Lent. And then her first one was for Ash Wednesday, and that was the Great Wave. So I love that. So we were actually in Chicago in November, and the Chicago Art Institute has 2 or 3 prints, and they had them out to be seen, because just even though it has the Prussian blue, but prints, because it's made on handmade paper, it's very, very fragile. So, and UV light is really toxic to these prints, so they have to keep them closed in very regulated conditions, and just put them out every few years for a couple of weeks. So we just happened to be in Chicago, and we got to see the Great Wave right there. And it's still different. I mean, I know we watch a lot of YouTubes, and I do that too, and you see all the work, but being right in front of us, it's really different and really cool. So to just finish this up and let you go, my last question is, all lives have challenges and waves to travel through. Do we trust in God to help us navigate these waves? And thank you very much for attending.